Welcome to NTD Newsroom. I'm Don Ma. A whirlwind day of diplomacy in Geneva as the U.S. holds talks on Iran and Russia and Ukraine. U.S. forces carrying out lethal strikes on drug trafficking vessels in the Pacific and Caribbean. 3 vessels targeted, 11 killed. Texas is suing Chinese network equipment company TP-Link. What the Lone Star State says about the company's links to the Chinese regime and its security risks. Reverend Jesse Jackson, civil rights icon and 2-time presidential candidate, has passed away at the age of 84. More on his legacy. Officials say there have been no confirmed DNA matches in Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, and President Trump weighing in on the investigation. We have updates.
This is NTD Newsroom, live from our global headquarters in New York City.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. The U.S. and Iran holding high-stakes nuclear talks in Geneva as the U.S. sends a second aircraft carrier to the Gulf. This comes amid threats of U.S. military intervention if a deal on Iran's nuclear program can't be reached. We now go live to NTD's Washington correspondent Mari Otsu at the White House. Mari, good afternoon.
Don, good afternoon. That's right, and these high-stakes talks in Geneva are coming as the U.S. is sending another aircraft carrier strike group to the region. That's in addition to the USS Lincoln, which is already there. And Iran's foreign minister says after these meetings that the U.S. and Iran agreed on, quote, guiding principles, but that it will still take more work to come to an agreement. And that's as U.S. officials say that the Iranian government tells them they'll have more detailed proposals in 2 weeks. And just a day ahead of these talks, Iran was conducting military drills yesterday in the Strait of Hormuz, with Secretary of State Marco Rubio saying that Iran is hard to make a deal with. He said that the Iranian regime is governed by what he calls radical Shia clerics who make theological rather than geopolitical decisions. And here's President Trump saying that Iran wants to make a deal. Take a look.
So I'll be involved in those talks indirectly, and they'll be very important. We'll see what can happen. It's been typically Iran's a very tough negotiator. They're good negotiators or bad negotiators. I would say they're bad negotiators because we could have had a deal instead of sending the B-2s in to knock out their nuclear potential, and we had to send the B-2s. I hope they're going to be more reasonable.
Meanwhile, discussions aimed at resolving Russia's war in Ukraine are also taking place in Geneva today. They're happening as Ukraine accuses Russia of launching a large combined attack on its energy infrastructure overnight into this morning. And President Trump, meanwhile, is pressuring Kyiv to come to the table quickly. Take a look.
We have big talks. It's going to be very easy. I mean, look, so far, Ukraine better come to the table fast. That's all I'm telling you. We are in a position, we want them to...
These talks are coming just 2 days ahead of a Board of Peace meeting that's set to take place on Thursday here in Washington. President Trump is vowing that the Board of Peace will be the, quote, a most consequential international body in history. He says that on Thursday, he'll announce that member states have pledged more than $5 billion toward humanitarian and reconstruction efforts in Gaza. He says that while repeatedly warning that Hamas must demilitarize. Don, back to you.
Okay, Mari, thank you. More on the war in Ukraine. President Volodymyr Zelensky is celebrating a major achievement. He says Ukraine has been able to bring back 2,000 children from under Russia's control. Zelensky says this is thanks to his Bring Kids Back initiative. He thanks civil society organizations and international partners for making the safe returns of these children possible. A video posted by Zelensky says Russia abducted many Ukrainian children during the war. Some of the kids went through interrogations, torture, and propaganda, brainwashing under Russian control. The Ukrainian president writes, quote, thousands of Ukrainian children are still held captive by Russia, becoming victims of its crimes every day. But we will not stop until every Ukrainian child is back home. Another strike on narco boats at sea. U.S. Southern Command says American forces hit 3 narco-trafficking vessels in 2 regions, killing 11. U.S. Southern Command says the operation took place late February 16th under what it calls Operation Southern Spear. According to the command, the vessels were traveling along known drug trafficking routes and were operated by designated terrorist organizations. 4 were killed on one vessel in the Eastern Pacific, 4 on a second vessel in the same region, and 3 on a third vessel in the Caribbean. The command says no U.S. personnel were injured. President Trump says a massive trade deal with Japan is now moving forward, with what he calls the first wave of investments under a $550 billion commitment to the United States. In a post on Truth Social, the president announced 3 major projects and an oil and gas development in Texas, a gas power plant in Ohio, and a critical minerals facility in Georgia. Trump says the projects will help revitalize American industry, create hundreds of thousands of jobs, and strengthen national security. He also credited tariffs for making the investments possible. The president called the deal historic and said America is building again and winning again. And Reverend Jesse Jackson, civil rights leader and 2-time presidential candidate, has died at the age of 84. In a statement, his family said he died peacefully this morning, surrounded by his family. They described Jackson as a tireless change agent who elevated the voices of the voiceless over decades of engagement in civil rights advocacy, voter mobilization, and presidential politics. The cause of death was not immediately given. Jackson rose to prominence in the civil rights movement, working alongside Martin Luther King Jr. in marches, sit-ins, and organizing efforts. In 2017, he disclosed that he had been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. The Jackson family said, "Our father was a servant leader, not only to our family, but to the oppressed, the voiceless, and the overlooked around the world." Public observances will be held in Chicago, with further details to be released by the Rainbow Push Coalition. President Trump is reacting to Jesse Jackson's death, saying he knew Jackson well. In a post on Truth Social, the president writes, quote, "He was a good man with lots of personality, grit, and street smarts. He was very gregarious, someone who truly loved people." Trump says he helped pass measures that Jackson supported, including criminal justice reform, long-term funding for historically black colleges and universities, and the Opportunity Zone's economic development package. Trump adds, quote, "He loved his family greatly, and to them I send my deepest sympathies and condolences. Jesse will be missed." Authorities in Rhode Island are investigating a deadly shooting at a high school hockey game in Pawtucket. Police say 56-year-old Robert Dorgan, a father who identified as a female, shot 4 family members and a family friend before taking his own life. The victims included the mother of Dorgan's son, a student competing in the tournament, and a sibling. 3 others remain in critical condition. Witnesses say a bystander tried to subdue the gunman. Officials described Dorgan as having a history of family court disputes and mental health issues. Police responded within minutes of the first 911 call. Pawtucket Mayor Donald Greben said the city is mourning and vowed to keep the public informed as the investigation continues. Now, the latest on the Nancy Guthrie case, the Pima County Sheriff urging the public to stop speculating that Guthrie's family members could be suspects. In a statement yesterday, the sheriff says, quote, "The Guthrie family, to include all siblings and spouses, has been cleared as possible suspects in this case. The family has been nothing but cooperative and gracious and are victims in this case." The sheriff says it's wrong and cruel to suggest that the Guthrie family could have been behind the kidnapping. Meanwhile, President Trump is threatening the kidnappers with the death penalty if Guthrie is not returned alive. In an interview with the New York Post today, the president says the kidnappers will face the most severe federal penalties if Guthrie is found dead. Authorities say preliminary tests on the glove found about 2 miles from Guthrie's home revealed DNA from an unknown male. There has been no match yet, but additional DNA is being analyzed. Investigators say the gloves appear to be worn by those gloves by the person seen in surveillance video outside the home. The FBI is still awaiting official confirmation of the results. Once confirmed, the unknown DNA profile will be entered into a national database in an effort to identify the individual. Authorities are also trying to locate Guthrie's peacemaker. Investigators are also working with Walmart management after identifying a backpack worn by the suspect as an exclusive store item. Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos told the Associated Press yesterday the 25-liter Ozark Trail Hiker pack was the only item of clothing that had been definitively identified. New developments in the Nancy Guthrie investigation. The Pima County Sheriff says DNA recovered from a glove found near her home has not matched anyone in national databases so far. Authorities say preliminary tests on a glove found about 2 miles from Guthrie's home showed DNA from an unknown male. Investigators say the glove appears similar to one worn by the person seen on surveillance video outside the home. The sheriff confirmed the DNA on the glove does not match DNA recovered inside the residence. Officials say additional DNA evidence from the home is still being analyzed, and they're also working to locate Guthrie's pacemaker with help from the manufacturer. Investigators are coordinating with Walmart after identifying a 25-liter Ozark Trail hiker backpack worn by the suspect as a store-exclusive item. The sheriff told the Associated Press it is the only item of clothing definitively identified. In a statement Monday, the sheriff said the Guthrie family has been cleared as suspects and described them as fully cooperative. Meanwhile, President Trump is threatening the kidnappers with the death penalty if Guthrie is not returned alive. A federal judge is ordering the National Park Service to reinstall slavery history panels at the president's house site in Philadelphia. The ruling temporarily blocking changes made on a Trump directive on how U.S. history is presented at federal sites. Judge Cynthia Roof yesterday granted the city of Philadelphia and its request for a preliminary injunction. The order prohibits further changes to the exhibit without an agreement between the city and federal government. The exhibit described the lives of 9 African American slaves owned by George Washington, as well as the history of slavery in Philadelphia. The National Park Service took down the exhibit's panels and video elements last month. The executive order from President Trump, they cited, said, over the past decade, Americans have witnessed an effort to rewrite the nation's history, replacing objective facts with a distorted narrative driven by ideology. The White House has not yet responded to a request for comment on the judge's injunction. Thomas Pritzker, the longtime executive chairman of Hyatt Hotels Corporation, is resigning. In a letter published yesterday, he acknowledges, quote, terrible judgment in maintaining contact with convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Here's more.
Thomas Pritzker is stepping down as executive chairman of Hyatt Hotels over what he called terrible judgment in maintaining contact with convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein and his associate Ghislaine Maxwell. In a letter to the board, the 75-year-old said he would not seek re-election this year. He said in his statement, good stewardship also means protecting Hyatt, particularly in the context of my association with Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, which I deeply regret. I exercised terrible judgment in maintaining contact with them, and there is no excuse for failing to distance myself sooner. Pritzker has held the role since 2004 and highlighted Hyatt's growth under his leadership. Steps taken during his time include taking the company public, shifting to a so-called asset-light strategy, and navigating the COVID-19 pandemic. His announcement comes after the U.S. Justice Department released millions of internal documents tied to Epstein. Epstein was arrested in 2019 on federal charges of sex trafficking of minors, and later that year died in a Manhattan jail cell, with his death ruled a suicide.
Now, we're about a week out from President Trump's first State of the Union address of his second term. Joining us to discuss is Mike Leon, lead anchor at Legal Podcast Network and host of Can We Please Talk podcast. And we have Tony Kinnett, national correspondent for the Daily Signal and host of the Tony Kinnett Cast radio show and podcast. So good afternoon, first of all, to you both. Mike, can I start with you today? You know, some Republicans are worried that Trump's upcoming State of the Union could be potentially overshadowed by a partial government shutdown. Is that an issue in your view?
Hey, Don, good to see you guys on this Tuesday afternoon. Yeah, I mean, of course, the optics, make a difference with respect to that, right? And it's not just a partial government shutdown, and the impact it would have not only to TSA workers, but to millions of Americans that fly, travel, whatever it is. It's also the other parts, Don. I mean, we've got, we had, Tony and I have debated about, the killings that have happened in Minnesota and with ICE and the operations there. There's job reports that are down from 2024 year over year. I mean, the president ran on drill, baby, drill, and we haven't been drilling. Oil rig production's down over a 4-year period. It's lowest it's ever been. So there's like a lot of other issues, but the optics of the backdrop of a potential government shutdown, which I think is the third under President Trump over the 8 years, or well, I'm giving him till 28, obviously. But I think, the optics don't look good for having a State of the Union. And not to mention the fact that, half the room is going to stand every 14 words and the other half may not be there, may all be wearing white. It's the same song and dance whenever there's a State of the Union. So it doesn't look good for sure. And I could see why there's some Republicans that are leaking to Politico and other outlets that they're a little worried about that.
Okay, Tony, your response, what would you like to hear from this State of the Union?
Oh, what I'd love to hear from this State of the Union is the ending. I hate long speeches. I don't care for the State of the Union. I'm not a huge fan of them. I would much rather honestly sit down with you and with Mike and enjoy a nice hot cup of coffee than listen to what Mike accurately described as one side being performative and the other side being performative. I mean, like Mike said, one side's going to stand up every 14 seconds and dutifully clap. The other side is going to stand up. You're going to hear Al Green shout and shake his cane and dastardly deeds or whatever it is that we're doing this day, a bunch of nonsense. Or on the Republican side, you're going to hear maybe Lauren Boebert stand up and yell back, and it's exhausting. Americans are tired of the performative nonsense from both sides. And of course, you can expect Trump to get up there and cherry pick a few things that are very easy to clap for, because last year during his State of the Union style speech, he made a very correct point. He said, I could cure cancer, and none of you would clap for it. And by the way, that's true with respect to the fact that there are also some things to be critical of him for, some things to praise him for. A lot of people want results that they haven't gotten. A lot of people have gotten more results. There's been a lot of the best and the worst preached over the last year. And so I'm interested to see how it's framed from purely a theatrical spectacle. If it's going to be a circus, well, then I'm going to buy peanuts, popcorn, and get a good seat.
Well, Tony, I got to say your impression skills are improving. Keep practicing.
I'm doing that just
Mike,
for you two.
Well, Mike disagrees, maybe.
Yeah, I'm angling, yeah.
But Mike, let me ask you, speaking of last year's State of the Union, which Tony raised, right. Some Democrats are talking about whether to skip the address, according to Senator Dick Durbin. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I was talking off air for my show this past week. We had Ruben Gallego on the program, and he kind of gave me a little bit of like what the thought process was behind some of this. And it's just, there's a damned if you do, damned if you don't, back to Tony's overall point, right? Like if you go there and you're not even unified in what you wear, what messages you do, Al Green's an outlier, like Tony said, then it doesn't even look like you're unified with respect to how you're protesting this. If you don't show up, I think that does send a message. But back to Tony's overall point about performance, it does show that there's a performance element to it. Now, it'll ring for the TV audience, and Donald Trump is very aware of the TV audience, because talking into a room that's got good acoustics, but half of the room is empty, will really, I think, resonate on TV. If I was advising Democrats, that would be my play to do. But also, again, back to Tony's point, these are the kind of speeches where it's like you would look for the leader, the CEO of the United States of America, for lack of a better term, to go out there and talk about the future and the current, right? Admit mistakes, but this is where I think, and I differ from Democrats, and this is what I want to do going forward. We're not going to get any of that. You don't even have to tune in next week. I can tell you exactly what that speech is going to be word for word, how many times Republicans are going to stand up, what Trump is going to say about 2020 election and all this different fraud. It's going to be a lot of the greatest hits. And therein lies the problem, right? Because that doesn't move us forward. And so for Democrats, I don't know how you counter that. And I don't need the response thing that we always get after State of the Unions. I don't need any of that from any side of the political aisle. That's even more annoying than the actual State of the Union. And I think I think Democrats are damned if you do, damned if you don't, unfortunately, Don.
So, Tony, Mike says maybe the president should admit mistakes. He'll be speaking to the American people directly. Do you think it gives him an opportunity to clarify some of his goals, maybe even bring relief to people concerned about his plans for the country?
I'm going to level with you both here for a second here. Just taking away kind of the usual segment that we do. An opportunity is the right word there. So I had donated $50 to the DeSantis campaign, transparency's sake, at the turn right before Trump had announced his reelection and his reelection bid, I should say. He got up and he gave this big, long speech. I was watching from my computer back when the studio was in my home office. And I watched President Trump get through 2/3 of stuff that mattered little to me. It was retributionist, oh, Biden is bad kind of stuff. And then he started looking to the future. I mean, I got some real John F. Kennedy vibes. And I mean, he said that we were going to be the first country that was going to go to Mars, that we were going to do this. And I heard the same kinds of things, by the way, when he sat down and he spoke with Rogan before the election. And I, despite myself, I was impressed. I think that the president has a huge opportunity here to point to the future and say, look, I know that everyone, we got some things accomplished. He can rally the troops. There are some things I'm not satisfied with where they are yet. He can be Coach Kurt Signetti of Indiana University at the end of last year's season. We're not winning. We didn't win the national championships, but next year, here's what we're going to do. And then I think he should praise Fetterman and how Fetterman and McCormick work together, despite being Democrat and Republican in Pennsylvania. He can point to some Florida Democrats as well that work well with Florida Republicans. There's an opportunity here to point to the future. Now, is he going to take it? I'm going to be honest with you, probably not. But that doesn't mean that I'm not going to call for it. It's what I want to see. It's Rubio. It's Rubio doing his same 2016 bid from the Munich Security Conference, the New American Century. I think that's what people would like to see, and I really wish it's where he's going to go, even if he didn't. Sorry for the long response.
No, it's okay. So, Mike, let's stay on this a little bit longer. What kind of address do you think Trump needs to deliver, to really convince the public that his party is on the right trajectory?
Well, I'm going to piggyback on a couple of things Tony said there, because a lot of the feedback I got from Republican voters that were leaning Republican that maybe would have voted for like a Nikki Haley, the Trump Rogan interview, and especially Trump Theo Vaughn as well, because he talked about his brother and the drug issues that his brother had and why he didn't do drugs,
well said.
why he was so hard on Don Jr. Those are the things that kind of resonated with people and made him more of a human being, that made them think Kamala Harris was too much of a robot. And it's one of the things that frustrated me about the Democratic Party. I was talking about this with Senator Ruben Gallego, specifically about this because I work in the boxing space, as you guys know, and we were encouraging the Democrats to go to a boxing event, a UFC event, because that's the audience you want to talk to. And instead, they ended up going to a WNBA game. They're already voting for Democrats, a WNBA audience, and it's a lesser market share than what the voter you're trying to get. And I think, to Tony's point, we do want more unifying messages. We're not going to get it with Donald Trump as president. Now, I want to be clear. I'm not going to take off my glasses like Tony, because then I won't be able to see anything. But I do want to echo something Tony said, which is we do need more bipartisanship and compromise. I don't think Donald Trump is some Nazi and some, radical, nonsensical thing that is a mythical creature of what Democrats are saying. I agree vehemently on some of the ways he's carrying out certain things. And so I'll vote for people that have similar interests to me in terms of how we execute policy. Nikki Haley was of interest to me when it was potentially a Nikki Haley versus a Joe Biden, right? Or even when it became Nikki Haley, Kamala Harris, if they had gotten down that trough, for example. And I think it's mainly because I want somebody to look the part and sound the part. And Donald Trump, when he does these type of speeches, these are Stephen Miller written speeches. So I know the cadence. I know where we're going to get the applause breaks. I know where he's going to veer off script, like he has mentioned, which is he on the Andrew Schultz podcast. He loves wandering. That's his thing. I think he said something like that, wandering. I forget what it was. And that's the problem. We don't need wandering right now, right? There are innocent Americans that have been killed recently. We've got the ICE deportations as the backdrop, and Minnesota and all of these other things that have happened. You mentioned, Don, before I came on, more boat strikes that happened in the Caribbean that, again, we don't know the verification of these folks that were killed in this. There's a lot of things that are issues wise happening for folks. And it's not just Mike Leon type voters and center, left or right, and they can play either side. It's other voters like the farmers that are impacted by the potential bailout, for lack of a better term, to Argentinian farmers, and the soybean farmers that will be affected by that, and the ones that have gone on television. You've got to talk to those people. You don't got to talk to me. You don't have to maybe necessarily talk to Tony. You have to talk to those people. And we're not going to get that kind of, we're never going to get that kind of speech from Donald Trump. We got little inclinations of how to be a human being during podcast interviews. But when he comes and does a thing like this in front of a room like this, it's the same usual hits. And that's not what Americans want to hear. That's not what they want to see.
So, Tony, can Trump and should he deliver a unifying message? And do you think he has does he have the ability to send a unifying message, touting his administration's achievements?
I do think he has the ability. So I will point to one of the greatest moments, I think, from his first term, when he responded to the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg on the Supreme Court. I think that was a powerful moment when he said exactly what was needed. And he said, nothing that wasn't. And then I think, in contrast to the death of a political opponent, and his response was to say that he had Trump derangement syndrome, and that's what killed him. And I found that to be despicable. Was that Rob Reiner? Mike, help me.
Yeah, Rob
remember
Reiner. Yep.
which
Yeah,
one
it
that was.
Yep.
Thank you. Yes. I found that reprehensible. I think that Trump does have the ability to do so, but also I know the man's got an ego, and the man wants to run a victory lap. And this is one of the things that I found was really interesting in a Wall Street Journal article recently, that mentioned that one of the interesting pieces of fallout in the second Trump administration is that because there are some that are so unwilling to simply get out there and say, yeah, there's an opportunity to work with this guy, they're essentially fueling more division that creates Republicans that don't want to work with them. I understand Mike Leon's desire for a technocracy, a technocrat who has a lot of competence and goes out with a calm, cool leadership. It's what I've called for on my show with kind of some slightly different language. But I think that Trump is still the coroner at the end of the day. The previous rhetoric of the United States left a lot of Americans unsatisfied. And as much as I would like to say that there's no one out there who wants what Trump is going to deliver a week from today, there's a lot of people that want Trump to come in with a sledgehammer for better and worse. And it's a very weird place to be in on the media sphere for that alone.
Okay, Mike, what do you think about this? Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries was reportedly frustrated with last year's disruptions, but this year some House Democrats are saying they're not going to listen to Jeffries' instructions to not protest. Representative Sri Thandar told Axios he plans to attend the speech and that he would love to show some resistance to what's going on. Some Democrats are saying this is not a good look for them. What do you think about that?
Yeah. Well, it's not a good look because Hakeem Jeffries has done the biggest political 180 that I've seen just from talking to Democrats all along. Not only the House strategists, people that work in comms, political commentators across networks. I mean, a few years ago, Hakeem Jeffries was the Nancy Pelosi, move out of the way. Let's hand the torch to Hakeem Jeffries. He knows what he's doing. Now, I mean, you got so many different Democrats that are opposed to what Jeffries and Schumer have done in terms of these strongly worded letters that they're sending to the White House. It's like, how about a little bit more action and a little bit more meat on the bones instead of what it is that you're doing that's antithetical to what we're trying to do in terms of, and I don't mean we, like I mean the proverbial we, like what we're trying to do in terms of opposing, the Trump administration and their policies. So it doesn't surprise me that there's been some Democrats that have said that. And again, I've heard that from people off air when we've had House Democrats or Senate members on the show, and I get the frustration. Again, the other part of this is, and I remember asking Congressman Glenn Ivey about this with respect to town halls back in Maryland, and he's like, I think people realize we don't have the numbers. Like we don't, like math is math, right? Like we're not in control of government right now. Yeah, we can stand there and opine, as you see right here, John Thune kind of talking on the Senate floor, but like we can do things like this and filibuster, but at the end of the day, sometimes we don't have the numbers for certain things, right? So there's not much more that we can do, and I think people understand that. So to the overarching point of like, what should Democrats do? I mean, leadership stems from the top, and right now Jeffries is like, don't do anything. Let's all be unified on this. And as you can see already, there are some Dems that are like, we got to do something more than just being unified and sitting there and letting him potentially spew some lies that can be easily refuted, across networks, like it will be in the afterwards, in the subsequent aftermath of all these panels breaking down the State of the Union. We have to do something that's more preventative instead of reactive. And I don't know the answer, Don. That's probably why I don't work for the Democratic Party. I don't know the answer, but I know Hakeem Jeffries doesn't have the answer.
So, Tony, let's get final thoughts from you. What do you think of the protest? Is it a bad look for Democrats, and anything else you'd like to add?
Well, so I'll try to be more apolitical in my response because obviously, the conservative thinking that the Democrat response would be bad. Yeah, I mean, that's a big shocker on that side. But I think that on an apolitical level, it depends on what they're protesting. I mean, if Trump gets out and he dangles red meat in front of them, politically, it's a bad move to stand up and protest, or, for example, not clap for, as they did last year with the kid that was struggling from cancer, or the girl Peyton McNabb, who we interviewed, that suffered from the brain injury in, competing against a guy pretending to be a girl. That's obviously something that they shouldn't do from a political perspective. That's a bad look. But also, again, I think that Americans are yearning for, of all things, as my counterpart said with Nikki Haley, a technocrat, one who sits there as the disappointed parent and looks unapprovingly on without acting like Shri Tanadar often does. I think that's what they're looking for. It's a bad look for them for sure. I'm not sure, again, there's a real way out of them for Trump boxing people into catch-22s is kind of his style. And he's kind of boxed himself into one as well, because like I said, we've already agreed on what Trump is going to say and do up there. It's more of a question, is the decorum around? Are we going to get Vance acting like Rubio did a couple days ago, or is it going to be more performative? I don't know. And I think those outliers are going to have a lot more impact than Democrats protesting.
Well, all right, let's leave it there for this week. Thank you again, both of you, for coming on the show.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for having us.
HHS Secretary RFK Jr. is going after the ultra-processed foods loophole. Joining us now to discuss is Emily Kaplan, co-founder and CEO of the Broken Science Initiative and Medfix, which offers a health curriculum that breaks down how the food we eat is used as energy or leads to chronic disease. So Emily, good afternoon to you. Thank you for joining us today. Now, the secretary is referring to the grass example as a loophole. So a little background here, 1958 Congress enacted the generally recognized as safe exemption, which allows food companies to independently verify the safety of their ingredients as long as they're considered generally safe. So I brought a clip here with me, Emily, of RFK Jr. talking about it. So let's just take a quick look at that.
That loophole was hijacked by the industry, and it was used to add thousands upon thousands of new ingredients into our food supply. In Europe, there's only 400 legal ingredients. This agency does not know how many ingredients there are in American food.
So let me ask you, in your view, what is the importance of ending the grass exemption?
So, I mean, I think if you go back to 1958, right, when this was originally established, the added ingredients were things like salt or vinegar or baking soda, things that we can all sort of collectively agree these are probably safe. I think what has happened is that the chemical processes that are being used really with carbohydrates and sugars are clearly deleterious. Those are, what make up most of the processed foods that we have. And I don't even know if you can consider some of these ingredients food. And so I think this is really sort of trying to pull back on what was intended to be things that were generally accepted as, food additives that we would have in our kitchen. The things we're talking about now, you can't make in your kitchen at home. They have to be made in an industrialized plant. And so I think his point is that this has been hijacked in the sense that industry has come in and they've started adding all of these things to our food supply. And that really what's important to understand about this is that this exemption was made originally for things that we generally knew were safe. And now what's happened is that the manufacturers of these food products get to pick their own experts. They form a panel of their own experts who they pay to determine that these ingredients are not harmful. And so you can see right there that there's a massive risk of conflict of interest. Are these scientists that are on these panels being really rigorous about this? It's voluntary whether they let the FDA know about what they have found or what the new ingredients are. So there's a lack of oversight on all of this. And I think, one of the things that's always interesting to me is that we can all collectively agree, regardless of what, how partisan things are, that our healthcare system is broken and that we've really been sort of lied to about the food that we're eating being safe and being what is effectively, sort of providing our body with energy that we need rather than leading to disease, which is really what we focus on at Medfix. But I think this larger picture, we all agree. We don't want to be feeding our children or feeding ourselves foods that are made up of chemical components that have probably never really been tested. I mean, the other thing to add about the way that this works in practice is that the manufacturers decide that it's probably okay to have, and again, it's a standard of harm, not safety. So they're not proving it's safe, they're proving that it's not harmful, but they're not going back and re-looking at things that have been out there the way that you would in a long-term clinical trial where you would, any drug that's entered in has to be approved by the FDA. And then there are regular checkups to sort of look, are we seeing a signal in the data that this is actually not safe, or there are consequences or symptoms presenting that we didn't initially know. There's none of that in the food supply.
So, Emily, I'm also wondering here if this is a problem unique to the United States. I'm not an expert, but Kennedy in the clip earlier we showed said there's thousands upon thousands of ingredients in the U.S., while there's only about 400 in Europe. Why is that the case? Is this unique to the United States?
Well, I mean, I can speak to the regulatory process, which is almost the inverse in Europe. And so in order for you to get new additives added to the food supply there, it goes through a regulated body within the government, and they are checking to see if it is safe. So again, our standard is it's not harmful, and that's decided by the individual private companies that are making and selling the food. And as soon as they make that decision, they can put it on the shelves. In Europe, it's the inverse of that. So the government has to go through. They're picking people who have to expose their conflicts of interest if they have any. They're not supposed to have any ties to the food company. So you're cutting down on that bias potential. And then the government is deciding, okay, this seems to be safe, and now you can bring it to market. So it's a slower process. Industry here would argue that our process allows for faster innovation, obviously faster delivery of these products. In Europe, they've taken a much stricter route, saying we have to know this is safe, not that it just doesn't cause harm, but that it is truly safe for the body to handle. And I think, when we talk about ultra processed foods, it's important to remember that we really are talking about carbohydrates and sugar. And when the dietary guidelines came out in the 70s, what we did was we removed fat from the diet, and that fat was really replaced by carbs and sugar. And so when you look at the chronic disease epidemic, it becomes really clear that this is coming from these carbs, and I would argue seed oils, which you really are finding mostly in these processed foods. So I think, part of Kennedy's campaign of Eat Real Food is if you're eating real food, you are not eating this processed stuff, and you're avoiding this problem in that way. And now this is another, the person who put forward the citizens petition was the former head of the FDA, under Biden. So there is agreement on both sides that something needs to be done about the way that we're delivering this food to Americans. I mean, I think if you really look at the whole scope of it, and this is tough to say, but I think the American public has really been treated like a bunch of lab rats, and the outcome has been chronic disease. And we need to start pulling that back in.
Yeah, I mean, this is a very serious, very practical issue that we're discussing today. I'm a consumer. I go to the grocery store just like anybody else. I want to ask you, is there any way today for an ordinary consumer, to find out how many of these substances, these GRAS-exempted substances, are in the food supply exactly?
Yeah, so I don't know the total number. I think, one of the things that we teach, we have a 2-day seminar that's really working with health coaches and personal trainers, so that we have actually over 100 locations in the United States that are MetFix gyms, and MetFix just stands for metabolic fix. And we talk a lot about this, how to help the average person navigate good food choices, because that's really what's going to drive health outcomes. And I think, the easiest thing to take away is that if you are eating food that doesn't have a food label, you are better off. And you don't really need to count your calories or your macros. You just need to eat those whole foods. So meat and vegetables as your primary options. Dairy is fine as long as it's full fat dairy. And I think, the more ingredients you see on the back, the more you should be sort of limiting those foods. And certainly when you're reading the label and you can't pronounce what it is that's inside there because it's a chemical compound that takes up the entire line of the ingredient list, I'd avoid that. I think that's an easy way to the average person can sort of start thinking about this. The other trick is to shop in the perimeter of the grocery store. So most of the processed foods is going to be in the aisles in the middle, whereas meat, vegetables, dairy are on the perimeter. So if you just stay on the outside, and again, if you just eat whole foods, you are going to be far better off than the average American. And I think right now we have the statistics is so alarming. It's 12.2% of Americans are metabolically healthy. That's it. So most people could drastically improve their health by learning the things that we teach at MetFix, but that also, honestly, just don't eat food with food labels. If you started there, you would see radical reversals of chronic disease.
Yeah, maybe you can give us just finally a bit more tips on that. Just not eating foods with food labels. I mean, I would imagine that might be a bit difficult. So maybe we can hear more tips from you, because they're everywhere, right? You brought up grocery stores. They're also in school cafeterias, vending machines, airports, some restaurants. as well. Maybe you can give us, more tips on how to avoid those foods with food labels.
Yeah, so I mean, I think if you're stuck in a situation where you're in an airport or you're in you're at school and it's very limited, I mean, obviously there's going to be fruit and vegetables usually available to you, and there should be meat. And so I would say, you want to cut out the things that have the labels. If they have labels, then look for foods that only have one or two ingredients on the labels. And, I think again, like we could probably make some correlation between the more ingredients on a label, the more deleterious it is to your health. And so as you're making those choices, you're really trying to find things that are as close to the original source of food that it was, right? So if you're looking for potatoes, you want to find, maybe mashed potatoes that have some cream and butter, but not like 1,000 ingredients. And I think we can do that. I know when I travel, Starbucks has egg bites that don't have carbs in them and that are really just egg and then maybe some bacon and some cheese. Meat sticks are always good to keep on hand. I keep those. And if you really want to have potato chips, we do have lots of brands now, like Mesa chips that are made with beef tallow instead of the seed oil. And one of the things that we talk about in our seminar is when you introduce seed oils, they have something that, basically we have in our body, reactive oxygen species, which is a signaling molecule in the body, and it tells the cell if it's full or not. And when your reactive oxygen species is low, which is what happens when you eat seed oils, your body is hungry. And so you want to eat more. So I always try to say, do an experiment where you take some, Doritos or whatever chips you really like to eat. Try eating them. You'll go through the whole bag, no problem. And then you try eating some of these chips that are cooked in beef tallow, and you get full faster. And it's at a cellular level, but it's the kind of experiment anybody can do. And I think it's actually a great way to talk to kids about good choices and not good choices. You want to eat food that makes you feel full. And these seed oils don't do that. They make you more hungry. And so you end up eating more of the garbage, unfortunately. And those carbs and sugar raise your insulin, which causes you to store that energy as fat you can't access. And so you're tired and hungry all the time when you're in what we call the glycolytic pathway. And whereas if you're eating meat and vegetables, you can access the fat on your body for energy. You'll sleep better. We in our MetFix locations, we're reversing type 2 diabetes sometimes in as short as 3 to 4 months. These are people who have been told their whole lives they have to be on medication. And by just getting rid of the carbs and the seed oils, they're able to reverse their diseases. Our MetFix locations are gyms. These are just places in communities all over America that are having this dramatic effect by using lifestyle to educate people and to, treat the diseases that we're all facing at such high numbers, even children. I mean, I like to always point out that 1 in 10 American kids has something called fatty liver, which used to only be seen in raging alcoholics. And it's because of the amount of sugar that they're being fed. And so this is a very serious problem that really deserves all of our attention. And so I think this citizens petition is looking at how have these manufacturers been able to get all of these chemicals that haven't really been tested at all. I mean, if you put this in the realm of drug approval, it would be unheard of to be putting all this stuff out for the American public to consume without any data publicly available about what they're putting in and what the impact of it is. And so I think this is about more transparency. I think it's about more honesty. I mean, we need to know what your conflicts of interest are. And if the manufacturer is paying you to say that this is not harmful, I'm not sure that I would trust that as much as I would if it was a panel of experts that were put together because of their expertise and were allowed to say, no, we do think it's harmful.
Yeah, I mean, very good information today. So useful, Emily. Thank you so much for speaking with us.
Oh, well, thanks for having me. This was fun.
Tricia McLaughlin is leaving her post as Assistant Secretary for Public Affairs at DHS. Secretary Kristi Noem confirms her departure in a post on X today. Noem says McLaughlin has served with exceptional dedication, tenacity, and professionalism. The DHS secretary writes, quote, "She has played an instrumental role in advancing our mission to secure the homeland and keep Americans safe." McLaughlin says she has been planning to leave in December but pushed back her departure amid the aftermath of the Renee Good and Alex Preddy shootings. Noem says her department is sad to see McLaughlin leave, grateful for her service, and wishes her success. And now a look at voter ID. Senate Majority Leader John Thune is set to challenge Democrats on new voter legislation. The Save America Act has the support of 50 Senate Republicans, including Thune, giving it the votes needed to overcome a major procedural hurdle. President Trump discussing voter ID aboard Air Force One yesterday.
And the Democrats don't want to give proof of citizenship. They don't want to give voter ID. Think of it. Who wouldn't want proof of citizenship?
It's an outrageous proposal.
Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer labels voter ID legislation Jim Crow 2.0 and pledges to fight vigorously to block it. He says many poor people do not have proper ID to fulfill the requirements. House Majority Whip Tom Emmer called Democrats hypocritical for opposing the Save America Act, which requires federally accepted photo IDs at the polls. Emmer noted that Democrats themselves demand photo ID for events like last year's DNC convention. Early voting has begun across Texas, kicking off a high-stakes primary season for Senate and other key races. Primary election day is set for March 3rd, with some races potentially headed for runoffs in May. Incumbent Senator John Cornyn faces a tough Republican primary against Attorney General Ken Paxton and Congressman Wesley Hunt. On the Democratic side, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett and State Representative James Tallarico are battling for nomination. Candidates are campaigning across the state with rallies and events timed to coincide with early voting. Several House contests are also drawing attention after redistricting shifted several districts toward Republicans, including the 28th represented by Democratic Congressman Henry Cuellar. White House border czar Tom Homan says that over 1,000 immigration agents have left Minnesota, with more leaving early this week. Homan also responding to some of the demands that Democrats have made to end the shutdown of the Department of Homeland Security. NTD correspondent Jason Blair reports.
Border czar Tom Homan says that over 1,000 ICE and federal agents have left Minnesota following a drawdown announcement last week.
As of Monday or Tuesday, we'll remove several hundred more.
Homan says that a small security force will stay behind while the team makes sure that agreements with local and state law enforcement remain in place.
Our security forces that will respond to when our agents are out and they get surrounded by agitators and things get out of control.
Homan says that during conversations with Governor Tim Walz and Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey, they didn't agree on everything, but he's happy with the results of the dialogue.
Me and Mayor Frey will never agree on much, but you know what? His officers did respond to take down illegal roadblocks that made it unsafe for not only citizens of Minnesota, but our officers.
The Department of Homeland Security has been shut down since Saturday after Congress failed to reach an agreement on funding. Some of the core demands from Democrats include restricting agents from wearing masks, ending alleged racial profiling, enacting stricter requirements for judicial warrants, and requiring agents to show ID and wear body cameras. Homan responded to some of the demands. He says that racial profiling isn't occurring.
ICE will briefly detain and question somebody based on reasonable suspicion. It has nothing to do with racial profiling.
He says that agents already wear identification placards and also comments on the masks.
As far as the mask, look, I don't like the masks either, but because threats against ICE officers, are up over 1,500%. Actual assaults and threats are up over 8,000%. These men and women have to protect themselves.
And now in Texas, if someone wants to register a vehicle with the DMV, they must first submit proof of legal status. The Texas DMV voted unanimously to approve the new rule. Some critics say the change will put more unregistered cars on the road and make it harder for police to locate some people of interest if there's a witness to a crime. The push for this rule was started last fall by Texas State Rep Brian Harrison. Reacting to the decision by the DMV, Harrison said, "Proud to have forced the DMV to stop allowing illegal aliens to register vehicles in Texas. Insane that this was happening for so many years." The decision was made on Thursday, and some counties have already started implementing the new requirement. Jason Blair, NTD News.
President Trump now getting involved with a massive sewage spill near the nation's capital. Trump directing federal resources and blaming Maryland's governor for mismanaging the situation. Here's more on that.
President Donald Trump now stepping in as a massive sewage spill continues flowing into the Potomac River. The president blaming Maryland Governor Wes Moore for what he calls gross mismanagement. Trump called the sewage spill a massive ecological disaster, saying local authorities cannot handle the situation. Trump said yesterday the federal government will step in to protect the river. In a social media post yesterday, the president said he was directing federal authorities to immediately provide all necessary management, direction, and coordination. The crisis began January 19th when a major sewer line collapsed in Montgomery County, Maryland. The rupture sent more than 240 million gallons of wastewater into the river. A local water utility saying nearly 250 million gallons overflowed from the waste pipe since early February. University of Maryland researchers are calling it one of the largest sewage spills in U.S. history. Researchers have detected high levels of bacteria in the water. Health experts warning of serious risks for anyone coming into contact with the impacted water. Officials emphasize drinking water has not been impacted. Governor Moore's office is pushing back against Trump's comments, saying it is the federal government, not Maryland, that is responsible for the sewer line. Meanwhile, emergency repairs are expected to take several more weeks. Permanent repairs could take up to 9 months.
This week, the Pacific Coast is facing multiple storm systems bringing heavy rain and potential flooding. Winter weather alerts were already in effect yesterday across parts of California, Nevada, and Oregon, ahead of 2 anticipated storm systems.
One of the things that we're concerned about with this storm is winds. Winds have been expected with gusts up to 60 miles per hour.
Authorities in Southern California reacting to the first of a series of storms threatening the Pacific Coast this week.
Heavy equipment operators. We've set up a swiftwater rescue team that's ready to respond, aviation resources.
The National Weather Service extended a flash flood warning Monday for parts of LA County amid reports of flash flooding and rock slides, with heavy rain forcing road closures due to mud and debris slides. Of particular concern, the possibility of debris flow on the burn scars from last year's massive wildfires.
This is all new mud, and some of the debris, you could see some of the burnt pieces of wood from the fire.
In Northern California and the Central Coast, the severe weather resulted in flooding and road closures and prompted rescues.
Felton firefighters actually went around and were able to hike and get to those 2 people to make sure that they were okay.
The storm also causing downed trees and power outages. Meanwhile, in the Sierras, there was heavy snow. And while it made roads hazardous, it was also a welcome sight for some, including skiers. The winter storm also pushing into Nevada, with slick conditions snarling traffic on parts of Interstate 80 at the California-Nevada border.
I knew there was going to be snow today, and I should have left yesterday instead of today, but oh well, I'm stuck here now. I can't even drive.
Warner Bros. Discovery has rejected a renewed $30 a share hostile takeover bid from Paramount Skydance. But it is giving the Revival Studio 7 days to the rival studio to submit a higher best and final offer. Paramount has informally floated $31 a share and could go higher. However, Warner's board says it remains committed to its planned merger with Netflix. The streaming giant is offering nearly $28 per share for its studio and streaming assets. Shareholders are set to vote on that deal March 20th. Under the merger terms, Netflix has the right to match any superior proposal. Paramount's bid values the full company at about $108 billion, significantly above Netflix's offer for select assets. Moving on to the UK, Britain wants to keep children safe online, but without compliance from tech companies, there could be wider restrictions on social media. The government is considering a ban for children under 16 years old. NTD's David Lamb reports.
Britain could be the next country to ban social media on a wide scale as early as this year if certain online risks are not reduced. The UK government says unchecked dangers such as addictive design and harmful content is pressuring it to prevent children under 16 from using social media. The government also plans to close a loophole on AI chatbots as part of its efforts to quickly address digital risks.
After Australia became the first country to block access for people under 16 years old, Spain, Greece, and Slovenia said they are working on bans as well.
Britain's 2023 Online Safety Act has a strict safety policy, but it doesn't cover one-on-one interactions with AI chatbots unless they share information with other users. The government wants to close this loophole as some children are forming relationships with AI systems. The government is also considering rules on how the data of social media users is stored.
We're taking immediate action that in the terrible event of a child's death, that there must be automatic notification of what we call data preservation notices.
In an interview with Times Radio Breakfast, UK Secretary Liz Kendall said that preserving online data could be vital to provide information to grieving families as well as evidence to investigators. In 2022, Ellen Room's 14-year-old son Jules passed away. She believes he was trying an internet challenge that went wrong. She hasn't been able to access his online data to prove it. An analysis from the UK-based Centre for Social Justice found that almost 1 million preschool children are active on social media platforms designed for teens and adults, even with age restrictions set at 13. Kendall says tech firms would be responsible for ensuring that their systems comply with British law. David Lamb, NTD News.
Canada is set to boost its defense spending and output. Prime Minister Mark Carney says he plans to dramatically increase the amount of weapons Canada buys from domestic firms instead of the U.S.
We have committed to double our defense expenditures by the end of this decade. And that amounts to an additional $80 billion over the next 5 years. And we are announcing Canada's first ever defense industrial strategy. It's a bold plan to get our armed forces what they need when they need it. It's a bold plan to scale Canadian defense companies and to put hundreds of billions of dollars into strategic sectors of our economy while creating over 125,000 high-paying jobs across Canada.
The announcement comes as Canada is on track to meet its 2% NATO defense spending target this spring, ahead of schedule. Carney says that over the next decade, Canada will invest $180 billion in defense procurement, $290 billion in defense security-related infrastructure, and create over $125 billion in additional downstream economic benefits. The Prime Minister adds that his strategy is about protecting Canada's sovereignty in its fullest sense and boosting its ability to act independently. He notes that the decision does not mean isolation. Canada currently spends 70% of its weapons budget on U.S. products, but Carney wants to bring the figure down. He wants Canadian firms to eventually hit that 70% mark instead. Starting today, China grants UK and Canada visa-free entry, raising the total to 79 countries. Joining us to discuss is Casey Fleming, Chairman and CEO of Black Ops Partners Corporation, National Security Advisor specializing in unrestricted warfare, and author of the book, The Red Tsunami: The Silent Storm Killing Your Freedom. Casey, good afternoon. Always great to have you on the show. Can you just talk to us about the scope and impact of the CCP's United Front groups in Canada?
Well, United Front groups are not just in Canada. They're in the US, the UK, Australia, and so on. But Canada, the one that we're talking about, has over 500 of these United Front organizations. So picture that. Picture 525 cars. That's the number of organizations. That's not the number of people that are influencing Canadian government, Canadian institutions, Canadian education, and the Canadian people. So they're influencing and replacing Canadian values, Canadian structure, Canadian thought with Chinese values, Chinese communist values, thought, and control. And that's the purpose of this thing called the United Front. And they're, like I said, they're all around the world. There's over 2,500 of them that are known. And in the US, there's over 2,000. But these are groups. They're not just individual people. So their impact is very big and it's very, very significant. And over time, it's extreme degradation of freedom. Every time that these people take action, it's against Canadian values and Canadian freedom, and the same with the US and so on.
So I would just like to add to that, Casey. You mentioned over 500 organizations, China's United Front organizations in Canada. According to a report by the Jamestown Foundation, the United States has the highest number of United Front groups, and Canada comes in second, having the highest concentration of the CCP's United Front among the country studies. So, I mean, what makes Canada useful to Beijing, rather than just simply focusing on the United States alone?
Well, several. Number one, it's a big country to take over. Secondly, it's a neighbor to the United States. So now, whatever they want to do militarily or even non-militarily, They have that ability being a very close neighbor geographically to the United States. And it's all and its resources and so on. But most importantly, it's to turn that country, the Canadian country, into a Chinese communist state.
So which sectors would you say are the most targeted by the CCP in these operations?
Well, anything with technology is the first. Technology is the first thing, any type of intellectual property that they can steal, but also government. Anything to do with government is to convert those people into Chinese totalitarian thought leaders. And they've done a very effective job with the reports that we have through our people on the ground in Canada. The UK is just as bad off, if not worse off, with these United Front organizations. And I've got to add to the audience, that China doesn't allow foreign influence. Why do we allow it? Why do the Canadians allow foreign influence? And it's usually done through, of course, money, blackmail, and influence. So if they don't allow it, why do we allow that? So that's something to ask your congressman. It's something to ask your politicians in Canada and your parliament. Why is that allowed here in Canada and not in China?
Yeah, you're totally correct about that. It's very much a one-sided relationship in terms of this. And you earlier spoke about wanting to change the thought within Canada to align more with the CCP. And we know Canada is part of international organizations, right? So how does that influence inside Canada translate to organizations' influence? Because it's in the Five Eyes Alliance, it's in the G7, and it's in NATO, just for example. How does that translate into influence in these organizations?
It's very significant. Any intelligence that we share with Canada could easily be shared with the Chinese Communist Party or stolen by the Chinese Communist Party. And it's just this whole influence thing. And then on global voting on these global institutions, it's one less vote for the United States and one more vote for the Chinese communists. So it's extremely significant, and we can't allow it to continue as a brother and a neighbor with Canada.
So I want to focus on what you just said, that we cannot allow this to continue. And I referenced the Jamestown report earlier. It raised a problem that it's difficult because much of this activity is actually legal, and it looks like ordinary civic or cultural work. So how do we tackle this issue if United Front activity doesn't often resemble classic espionage?
Through foreign influence. If there's any money changing hands, it's got to be illegal, it's got to be banned, and it's got to have very strong prison sentences. And that's not just for Chinese, but it's also Canadians. We're speaking about Canada, also Americans, if we're talking about America. But any natural citizen or actual citizen is facilitating this, whether it's a shell company, whether it's by proxy. But the laws have to be there. Like I said, China does not allow this. Why do we allow them to completely come in and take over our society and replace it with Chinese communism? And I might add that communism has never succeeded anywhere on the planet in history, ever, not even once. It has never succeeded to where it's a solid economy and where everybody's equal and they're treated equally. It's a grand falsehood. It's a grand utopia that they sell that they can never deliver. And that's the issue. You know, the good guys are not getting through to the Canadian people, but the bad guys certainly are.
Okay, Casey, I would like just one more comment from you, and I want to have you react to one example in the United States here. So this is one that we have covered at NTD. So recently, the CCP's transnational repression and the attacks on the New York-based Shenyun performing arts groups. I'm using that as an example here. So the CCP engages in misinformation operations at slandering the company publicly because it shows, the performance shows China before communism and exposes its human rights abuses within China. So how do you look at this? What are the broader implications for the United States when the CCP can do this?
It's the end of free speech. It's the erosion of freedom. I can actually speak about Shenyun because they actually are a client, and the CEO gave me specific permission to go ahead and discuss it. But the level of persecution coming out of the CCP towards Shenyun and the Falun Gong is unprecedented because they basically represent China before communism, about the way life was, a simple life, a respectful life, and so on, where there was no Chinese Communist Party to completely control everyone and to abuse them and have extreme human rights issues. But it's the persecution that's going on, not to mention the 40 CCP police stations on sovereign U.S. soil. But we've seen everything with the CCP calling in bomb threats to the Lincoln Center and the Kennedy Center right before performances are going to start. We've seen slashed bus tires, canceled hotel reservations, intimidation when they fly back to U.S. airports by U.S. Customs and Border Protection with Chinese nationals in U.S. Customs and Border Protection. So this is American freedom that we're talking about. When you say Shenyun, well, that's a Chinese dance company. Yeah, but they also are a free Chinese dance company, and they're anti-CCP, and they are in the United States on sovereign U.S. soil and should be protected, but they're not being protected like they should be.
Yeah, I mean, those are extremely good points. And I would just like to add to your point about the slashed bus tires. One of the dancers' mother actually commented on this issue. She said the tires were slashed in a way that it doesn't deflate immediately, but it would explode if the bus were on a highway going at speed. And I think if I remember correctly, this mother said this is equivalent to, attempted murder. I'd just like to point that out. But Casey, very good comments from you. Thank you so much today.
Thanks for having me.
Texas is suing Chinese network equipment company TP-Link. State Attorney General Ken Paxton says the company is allowing the Chinese Communist Party to access Americans' devices. Paxton says that despite its claims of privacy and security, TP-Link's products have been used by Chinese state-sponsored hackers to launch multiple cyber attacks against the U.S. He adds that TP-Link's ownership and supply chain are tied to China. The company is subject to China's national data laws, which allow the CCP to have access to U.S. devices, as nearly all of its products' parts come from China. The Texas Attorney General says the company poses a national security threat, and the lawsuit should, quote, serve as a clear warning to any Chinese entity seeking to compromise our nation's security. The Lone Star State says the lawsuit is part of a broader initiative to protect Texans' data, and the Texas Attorney General will file more lawsuits this week against companies aligned with the Chinese regime. President Trump says he will soon decide on a major arms sale to Taiwan following discussions with Chinese Communist leader Xi Jinping. Trump yesterday said he spoke with Xi about the sale and their relationship remains strong despite differences. He also expects to visit China in April for talks with Xi. Xi has repeatedly warned that Taiwan is the most sensitive issue in U.S.-China relations. Washington approved a more than $11 billion weapons package for Taiwan last December, the largest ever proposed for the island. Days later, Beijing conducted massive live-fire drills near Taiwan. The European Union has opened a formal investigation into Chinese online retailer Shein. The probe falls under the bloc's Digital Services Act. Companies found in breach of the act could face fines of up to 6% of global annual turnover.
Today, the Commission is launching a formal investigation into Shein under the Digital Services Act. We suspect that the company has breached the DSA in 3 areas. First one, a highly addictive design for our consumers in the EU with rewards programs and a gamification of the service. Second, a lack of transparency on recommender systems. Third, the sale of illegal products online. What are these illegal products? This includes weapons, and this includes child sexual abuse material, such as childlike sex dolls.
Shein may be required to alter its actions or pay a hefty fine if a so-called non-compliance decision is reached following an in-depth investigation. The fast fashion giant came under fire late last year in France, where authorities found illegal weapons, including firearms, knives, and machetes, as well as childlike sex dolls for sale on its website. Shein and its Chinese rival Temu have become the most high-profile symbols of broader concern over the flow of cheap Chinese products into Europe. Mom power is on display at the Winter Olympics. A pair of American mothers won gold and bronze medals yesterday in the mono bobsled.
Yeah, my kids have sacrificed so much. Like, there's so many people who helped me win this gold medal. Like, it's incredible. I've had different nannies throughout the years, and they, each and every single one of them, did the work to help my kids get here. And it's just been so incredible. My husband, I can't even put it into words, like, what this means and how many people it really took to win this.
I mean, you get a lot of people that like to write you off. You know, as soon as you reach 40, it's all downhill from there, is what you hear, you know. And I think Alana and I are both proof that that's not true. As soon as you become a mom, you know, your body's not the same and you can never get that high performance back. And I think we were able to show that that's not true again.
Gold medal winner Elena Myers-Taylor has 2 children with Down syndrome and hearing impairment. She won 3 silver and 2 bronze medals in her previous 4 Olympic appearances. That matches her with speed skater Bonnie Blair with 6 Winter Olympic medals as the most decorated U.S. woman. She becomes the oldest athlete to win individual gold at the Winter Games. She shared the podium with a fellow mom and a bronze medalist who gave birth to her son about 18 months ago. Countries all over the world are celebrating the Chinese New Year today, welcoming in the Year of the Horse. People from Taiwan to Buenos Aires gathered to celebrate and usher in another year of prosperity and fortune.
Every year of the horse is special, or rather, the years of the horse make us think of a special year. The horse arrives and brings success, and believe it or not, we have been working with that energy for a month for this event.
I hope that my job will be smooth in the coming year and that I find a new job that I like.
In Taipei, the historic Bao'an Temple was struck 108 times to ring in the new year. The number 108 is seen as auspicious in Chinese culture. And in Buenos Aires, the local Chinatown kicked off a multi-day celebration with cultural and artistic activities, as well as a wide range of delicious foods. Argentina's Chinese community developed in 2 main waves. First by Taiwanese families who settled in the 1970s, followed by immigrants from China's Fujian province in the 90s. The new lunar cycle is associated with the fire horse, the 7th sign of the Chinese zodiac. Chinese zodiac signs are determined by year of birth and repeat every 12 years.